Are you ready to break unhealthy generational parenting practices? Then stick with me just a little while longer. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss out on our weekly educational and sometimes fun content on parenting and child development. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Talk Time Tuesdays with the Whole Parenting. My name is Louise. I am a mom and I'm also a family and child development consultant. Now, a few months ago, I was on Facebook, as one does, spending some time, burning some time, and I saw this post and it went somewhere along the lines of, you were raised by XYZ parents if you were subjected to XYZ. And most of the points made were quite negative, and it was in relation to parents of my ethnic and cultural background. Now you can imagine that the comment section was lit with a lot of emotions, and I mean, it was divided. Some people were in agreement, some people were in disagreement. People were disagreeing, and it got me thinking about unhealthy generational parenting practices and how dangerous they are, but also how important it is that we should do everything that we can to break those generational practices. Now, there are so many ways that parents mess up their children, and it is not reserved to a certain ethnicity, and nor is it reserved to a certain culture. So many of us mess up, and so many of us inadvertently hurt our children without meaning to. And if you think that you're a perfect parent, then that's your first mistake. I mean, I work with parents so often, and on an intellectual level, I know what it is that I should and shouldn't be doing. I know what it is that's right and wrong, and I still make mistakes. Even as a parent, I will inadvertently do things that will hurt my child, hurt my children. And it's even though I know on an intellectual level what I need to do and know what is right and wrong. And this is because our parenting practices are not just about knowing right and wrong. It requires an intentional and conscious effort to make change, and that goes really deep. Today we continue our series on self-regulation in parenting with an introduction on a discussion around breaking unhealthy generational parenting practices. I'm sure you've made mistakes as a parent, and I am sure that no matter how brilliant your parents were, you can still look back and pinpoint actions that they took, practices that they had that you would not want to repeat with your children. Dan Siegel says this, and I quote, "In the absence of reflection, history often repeats itself." And this is because research has clearly shown us that our children's attachment to us will be influenced by what happened to us when we were young if we do not come to process and understand those experiences. But where do we start? How do we stop the cycle from repeating itself? How do we stop the cycle of unhealthy parenting practices passed down through generation to us from being repeated? Now, the first and possibly biggest problem with repeating unhealthy parenting practices is that most of our parenting actions are performed when we are not consciously aware of what we're doing. And most of our parenting practices are heavily influenced by our experiences from early childhood and from childhood and youth altogether. And if we're not conscious about those experiences, can influence our parenting so heavily that we can wound our children by continuing and repeating those practices. So, for instance, a father may repeat the same harsh and overbearing parenting practice that his father practiced with him, even though that practice hurt him in the past. A mother may decide that she wants to be overly generous with materialistic things to her children because when she was a child, nobody gave her anything material. She wouldn't be given gifts, she wouldn't be given nice things. So she feels that being overly generous with her children will make up for what happened in her childhood and will cause her children not to be unhappy. In the meantime, she's neglecting to give them any of her time and attention. And we can go on to the old controversial corporal punishment, where people feel that hitting a child is fine because, well, it didn't do anything to me. I was beaten and I'm just fine. And I mean, we can go into why we are not just fine because we have been beaten, but that's for an entirely different video. But I will say this, that the narrative of saying I was beaten but I'm just fine is in itself subconsciously a defense mechanism to the hurt that we face as children when we were beaten. Being beaten by the people who are supposed to be using their hands to nurture you is not normal. And we need to normalize saying that this is not normal. According to a study by the University of Washington Social Development Research Group, adults who had been physically and emotionally abused, and let's call it as it is, as children were more likely to repeat those patterns with their own children. The research pointed out that poor parenting, including physical and emotional abuse, frequently was observed across 3 generations, suggesting that those choices can affect families for decades. Now, I won't even go into why beating a child should be frowned upon right now. That's for another video, and believe me, we will deal with it. But for now, I want us to start thinking about how it is that we can change unhealthy generational parenting practices. So how do we do this? Now, first of all, we'll go into each of these later on, and it will make up part of the series. But for now, I'm just going to touch briefly on each of them. Now, the first one is that we need to acknowledge that there are unhealthy parenting practices and cycles that we need to stop. Secondly, we need to observe our parenting triggers. When you feel triggered, angry, sad, afraid, examine the motivation of those feelings, where they're coming from and why you're having them. Thirdly, we need to parent consciously. Fourthly, stop yourself when you observe a negative parenting practice that you know you actually do not want to practice. Number 5, learn to apologize to your children. And this is in no way making you look weak to your children. It's in fact something that will help your children to respect you even more and to build a closer relationship with you and to connect with you far more deeply. Number 6, practice self-care. It will help you to manage your stress. I cannot overemphasize the importance of practicing self-care. Number 7, rewrite your story. Now, we had a lovely conversation with Geraldine Fabian a few weeks ago, and in it she mentioned about rewriting your story. And you can check that video, that talk, in this link. It should be somewhere on the screen. But rewriting your story is not about telling untruths about who you are and telling untruths about your experiences. It is about seeing it from a different perspective. Number 8, reshape your thinking to allow for new parenting practices. Number 9, get some outside help from a therapist to work through some of these old issues, or speak to a qualified parenting expert on how you can learn new and effective ways of parenting. Number 10, set boundaries. Respectfully ask people to step away from and refrain from encouraging you to take actions in your parenting that you know are poor and will cause you to repeat unhealthy generational practices. 11, adopt new and positive ways of parenting your children. Next week, we will delve a little bit deeper into how past traumas from our childhood can affect our present parenting and how we can deal with those. I hope you'll join us then. If you found this video helpful in any way, I'd like to invite you to like the video and to share it with someone who you think will benefit from it. I'd also like you to subscribe to this channel. Please don't forget also to hit that notification bell so you never miss out on any of the valuable content that we bring to you every week on a Tuesday. Have a lovely week and see you next Tuesday.